Hello all and welcome to the next video in our JavaScript journey. Today we're going to be talking about creating a web app using the DOM or the Document Object Model. If you're referring back to our book, we are now on chapter 5. Today, we're going to understand the principles of building a web app. We're going to create nodes and append them to a web document. We're going to restructure a web document by adding, deleting, copying, moving all of these different element nodes. We're going to define a timed command that repeats a function or a command block at specific set intervals. We're going to create system dialog boxes that receive user input. We are going to open and configure a browser pop-up window. We're going to create an overlay that lies on top of a web document. And then finally, we're going to work with the objects within our BOM or our browser object model. Let's get started. In order to design a web app, we're going to use an example of what we call a lightbox or a slideshow. And what that's going to do is it's just going to show various static pictures where you can scroll through all the pictures. We're going to build it in 4 different chunks. First, we're going to have an HTML that is going to provide basically the container for the app and where it sits. We're going to develop a CSS code that is going to define the app's appearance. We're going to implement the JavaScript code, which is going to manage the operation and the output from the app. And then finally, we're going to have data. Usually that's stored outside of the app. So in our case, our data is going to be the actual image files. All of these components in the real world may or may not be developed and maintained by the same person. They can be very easily outsourced to different departments or different developers, and then that way they are easily integrated into each other in the end. So for example, here we've got some information in our header block. In our header block here, we have our script that we are used to seeing. In that header, we also now have a script lightbox data file here. So here we've got lightbox underscore data.js as a JavaScript, and we load it the same way we load the script in order to create that lightbox. You can also see here we've got 2 different style sheets, and the style sheets are those CSS files, and we can create the link between the file by saying link. The relationship is it is a style sheet, and my H reference or my HTML reference or whatever you want to call it, URL, is the lightbox.css, and that is going to be the style sheet that is going to format the appearance of that lightbox. In our HTML, the last thing we're going to do is in the body, we are going to have a line that is going to create an element and give it the ID of lightbox. And so we do that by adding the line here, div, where the ID is equal to lightbox, and that's it. From what we can see now, that's all of the updates that we have to do in the HTML to get our lightbox up and running. Over here on the right-hand side is going to be the start of our JavaScript file. Here we've got some great commenting where we can see what's going on, but we've got the title. So let the title equal my Western vacation. Here we have the name of the images. So the name of each image as that data going through an array. Here we've got the different captions that we're going to associate with each image, and we're putting that in an array also. So let the image captions equals new array. I'm putting 12 in there going from 0 to 11. So the image caption associated with photo 1 is going to be Sky Pond, Rocky Mountain National Park, and so on. Finally, the last variable we're going to define is going to be the count of images in the slideshow. So image count equals the number of files and the length of that. This, we don't really need to create its own separate variable, but it is going to help us later on down the line. In order to expand what we're doing in this Lightbox, first let's talk about nodes and your document object model, your DOM. So a node is an entity that represents an element, attribute, comment, processing instruction, or text string in your web document. So basically it's anything, any kind of thing that's going to be happening. Now we have what we call a node tree, which is going to be a hierarchy structure of how we organize our nodes, and a great graphic of it is over here on the right. The nodes are going to have a relationship that we can describe as a relationship that we have in families. And by that, I mean nodes have a parent-child relationship. They can be siblings, and that's how we look at our structure. Now, the root node is going to be your parent at the very top, and we can refer to these nodes using our JavaScript. So for here, my root is the document. The document is a parent of the HTML. The HTML is a parent of the head and the body. And we've seen this in our HTML. In the head, we have a title, and in the header is where we connect all of those links that need to be connected. And the body is going to be all of those headers and those paragraphs. The different relationships that we can identify between nodes are found in this table. We can have a first child or a last child. We can have child nodes, which would list all of the nodes that are children. We can have previous sibling and next sibling. We can also have the owner document, and that would be the root node of whatever your document is. And finally, we can ask for the parent node of a specific node. Here we have the word node, and what you would put there would be the identifier of the node. So some sample references: a parent node dot parent node. You can extend that and go grandparent, parent node dot parent node. You can look at aunts, uncles. Just remember, look at that tree as if it were a family tree or an ancestry tree. So a sample reference to the very first node in any node list, it would be starting with the index 0, and we can treat child nodes as if it were an array. We can say that children properly will reference element nodes, whereas child nodes is going to reference any type of node. Here we've got some element node relationships. We can ask for a list of all the elements which are children by saying children, first element, last element, previous element sibling, next element sibling, and finally we have the parent element, which would be the parent of that node. We can select any of the nodes with a query selector all method, and how we do that is we say document dot query select all. Here we put CSS, and that is going to define a node list based on a CSS selector. Your node lists are not going to be identical to your HTML collections. You can only reference your items by index, and in this case, they can reference all different types of nodes. This is static, it is not dynamic. So it is going to be once all of those nodes are loaded, and know that that's not going to change even if you add nodes after. We do have a method called query selector, which is going to return the first matching element node rather than the list of nodes, which is what you get from the query selector all. We can create and connect nodes by using some of these examples. So here at the very top, we have an example to create the document fragment. So we've got our header, let main heading equals create element index h1, let heading text variable equal document create text node, my slideshow. Main heading dot append child heading text. So it's going to take the element here created in main heading, and to it, it's going to add the child of heading text. So if we were to look at it at that tree, it would be main heading at the top and directly under it, heading text. To add a document fragment to a web, attach it to a node already there in the node tree. So here, intro div is element by intro. And then once we get the element that we want out of the HTML by using this first line, we can then append to it whatever we need to. Nodes have a lot of built-in functions and methods in order to copy or create. So we have create attribute, create comment, create element, create text node, and clone node. That's going to do a whole bunch of different actions with those nodes. So we can create an attribute, we can create a comment with a text, we can create an element, or at the very bottom, we can create an absolute copy of a node where it would be copied of that node all the way through. We can also add by append child. We can also add by insert before. So if we do an insert, we have to give it a location and what we want to insert. We can get rid of nodes by saying remove child, or we can replace child. So replace will remove the child and then insert the new. Insert before just merely inserts it. Every HTML attribute is going to have a corresponding node property. Most of them have the same names. We've used these before: ID, src for source, href for a URL. The class name property is going to set a value for the class attribute, and the class list property can be used to add, move, replace values from an element with multiple classes. Here we've got an example of code defining inline styles using the style property. So this, in other words, would not be reading it out of the CSS, it would be directly in the HTML. So main heading 1, my style, I can create my font size and I'm going to send it 1.5. Here in my main HTML, I have a style code and I'm going to make the color blue. Here are some great examples of some of these elements. So here on the upper left, we've got a bunch of variables being defined in different things. So we've got an H1, we've got a counter, create element, create element. So we're creating 6 elements here that are all H1 and div element nodes. Down here at the bottom, we are able to append the lightbox heading, append an image, and append previous and next buttons. And by appending, we're just adding all of those elements into the document. By doing that, I say in my lightbox, I'm going to append the title. My title ID is going to be equal to LB lightbox title. And it just repeats that about designing each one of these elements and adding it to the lightbox as a child. If I come over here to what I would see graphically in the HTML, I've got my lightbox here down at the bottom in this orange. This is where all of those images are going to be seen. Here on the right, you can see where I have created all of the nodes and how they have been appended to the document. Here down at the bottom, I can see the styles. Again, this right-hand side is nothing more than those developer tools that are available within your browser. Over here on the left, I am taking a for loop and I am adding each of the images. So we've got an array of image names and I'm just going to count through that array and add each image to my lightbox. So here, let image equal create image. My source is going to be the file name. My alternate, which is the words that go with it, that is going to be that caption. Then I'm going to take that image and append it to the lightbox images. So it's going to add the new image element that I created in the for loop to the Lightbox Images container. Down here on the left, I'm going to add a title. So I've created a title. I've given it the ID title, and I'm appended it to my Lightbox. I'm setting the text content equal to Lightbox title. And I did the same thing with my counter. So if I look over here on my HTML, there's my title that is added at the top, and the counter is in the corner. Up here, I take the previous, next, and play buttons, which are going to be here, previous, next, and play buttons. I've given it some symbols for the previous and next. I've given it the little arrow. And then here, finally, on the play, I've given it the little play button kind of image. If I look down here again on the right-hand side in the developer tools under elements, I can see that I have added into my HTML the symbols for the previous, next, and the play buttons right here in these three. Down here at the bottom, these are all of the images that have been added to this Lightbox container using the for loop over here on the left. If we were to need to move some of these nodes, we can call a method that is named append child. And that will take a node that is already part of the document tree and add it to the end of the child list. So if it's in the wrong position, we can make those changes. Any nodes within that array will have their index now shifted down by 1. So here in this example, if I'm going to append a child first element, I'm going to take that first one, it's going to put it at the end like it did here. And then instead of this being an index 1, it's now going to be index 0. This is going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, and then that one's going to be at the end. Here we've got some examples here. This is just taking the first image and moving it to the end of the list. We're going to increase the image count by 1 until the last image is read, and then reset the image count to 1, update the text in the image counter box. This is just an example of how we can move forward through that image list. Down here at the bottom, we have a show next, which will be a function that we define when we click on that next button. Remember, we created that button with the little arrow that says I want to see the next image, and this we're going to create a show next function in order to do that. We can move nodes by using the insert before method. And basically what we do here is we say node insert before, we give it the new one, and then we tell it the element that we want to be after it. So where we want to insert it. So basically we're giving it the element and the location. Some sample code, take the last element child and put it in front of the first element child. So this actually right here, this code is going to take the last image and insert it before the first. We also can clone nodes, and here we use the clone node and deep. So we can either pass a true or a false, and that will create a copy of the node. If we pass a true, it wants a deep copy. It's going to be the node plus all of its descendants. If we send it false, it's going to be the node itself. So this method is going to copy DOM content, but not the JavaScript properties attached to that node. So if you do use clone a node, just be aware of that one little point. Here are some example code in order to do just that. So here I've got insert before. It's going to move the last element child and place it before the first element child. Here we're going to do some decreasing, and then we're updating the text. Here we are designing the show previous button. So here's my function show previous. We do have to add the event listener onto that little arrow that we created. And so we say on click, show previous. Running timed commands. Now, a timed command is something that is going to repeat at a specific time or a set interval. So we do have some specific syntax, and what we say is here we have a variable, and it's going to be equal to the window dot set interval, the command that needs to be repeated, and the interval in which we want to repeat it. If we would like to stop a timed command, we can say clear interval and then use the variable. We can also create a timed command that runs once after a specific amount of time. So here's my variable, set timeout, the command you want it to complete, and the delay. So to prevent a delayed command from running, we use the clear timeout method. Here we have an example. This is going to be that play pause button. So we want to create a function here. We're using a non-named function. So on click, it's going to show next, and it's going to set the interval at 1500 milliseconds or 1.5 seconds. So in this case, it's going to show the next image every 1.5 seconds. Here I've got the play button again. If the time ID, so if the slideshow is running, clear interval, time ID. So if it's already running and you click the button, it's going to stop. If it is stopped, it'll be false and you want to start it. So you'll do the show next and the time ID, which we figured out over here. So that is going to be how you determine whether you do the play function or the pause function when using that play pause button. A pop-up window is an external window that is open and displayed to your user, and it usually appears on top of anything that you have already running. A system dialog box is a specific type of pop-up window. Typically, it's an alert window, and we can use the window.alert method. A confirmation window typically displays a message plus an OK button or a cancel button, and that is just basically asking your user, are you sure you want this? And from that, we can say window.confirm for a confirmation window where we have a message. It's going to return a true, which is okay, or a false, which is cancel. Finally, a specific type of pop-up window is a prompt window, and that is actually going to be a window with some sort of text input waiting on the user with OK and cancel buttons. We create that by using a .prompt with the message and the default, and it's going to return the text string. So here are our examples, a window.alert. It's just displaying information. You hit OK to clear it. A confirmation window. Do you want to quit the game? OK for yes or cancel for no. And then finally, a prompt which says, which game do you want to play? You would have to enter in your name and hit OK or cancel. You can open a new window object with its own collection of properties and methods, which you can then turn around and use to define its appearance and its content. So in order to do that, we can say window.open with the URL of the file to display, the title of the window, the options, which would be comma separated values or features, and then finally replace. And that would be a true or false whether you want to replace or create a new entry. All of these URL, title, and options are going to be enclosed in double quotation marks. When you assign a new window to a variable, you can apply properties and methods of the window object after you create it. So you would just have two separate window objects to work with. Writing content in your browser window. So you can add nodes to the new window by referencing the window.document.body. So we're not just doing document.write anymore. Now we would have to say window.document.write. We are limited. A lot of times these are going to be those windows that are blocked by pop-up blockers. So you need to make sure that what is being displayed is actually needed by the user and that you can avoid some of those blockers. So We don't scale well to small screens. If you've ever had a pop-up kind of come up on your phone, you probably understand this one. We also can't display files loaded locally on a user's computer. Pop-up windows are often completely inconsistent when we're going amongst browsers, as far as whether a browser supports it or not. So we're talking, again, Safari versus Edge versus Chrome. They all deal with them differently. And so pop-ups really are inconsistent when we're looking at those web pages. We can create an overlay, which is an element that's going to lay on top of the page and partially cover up what's on there. It's a type of window that we call a modal window, and it's going to take control of the application. And in order to proceed, we're going to have to acknowledge it. So it's kind of like a pop-up dialog box, but it's just masking what is there, and your pop-up blockers won't see them. Again, you've probably seen these on some web pages, especially like retail web pages. They can be created as elements sized to cover however much real estate you want to cover of your website using your HTML and CSS. In order to do this, we use something called a this object. So this is going to reference the owner of whatever is currently running. So for an anonymous function to be called by an event or handler or listener, the owner of that function has to initiate the event. So if we're going to say put an overlay on top of this element, we can say let overlay image equals this, clone the node and say true. We can then put on top of the web page, we can append the child and put the overlay image on top of it. So as far as we say this means the one we're currently working on. This is a little controversial in the programming world. It is making things a little bit more explicit, but some programmers feel like it makes things a little bit more complicated. We can remove a node. So we can say node remove child, old, and we can get rid of that overlay by removing it. Designing the look of an app, we can place any design choices that we want into what we call a CSS style sheet. And this is going to make the app's visual appearance so much easier to modify, because just as we have that separate JavaScript file, making it easier to update and maintain functionality of the website, the CSS style sheet does that same thing for the look and feel and colors and things of that nature. So one strategy is to use class names to apply formatting so that your details are stored in that CSS and not the JavaScript file. Here we can show that we're putting an overlay. And in this case, what we're using as an overlay is an exploded version of that image. So here we've got a create overlay. So let overlay create element. ID is an overlay. Let figure box create element. Append the child figure box. Document body append child overlay. That's the line right there. That's going to add that overlay to the page body. So here we're going to add image array to the container. So we're going to create here image on click create overlay. So if your user is to click on any of the images, it is going to create overlay, which displays that overlay of the larger file on top of your lightbox. Here we've got the create overlay, let overlay image equal this dot clone, append the child to the figure box. So that's going to copy the image that called the function and put it into the overlay. Here we're going to display the value of the alt attribute as the caption. Remember, we said that that was the alt. And then we're going to add the caption to the overlay box. And then down here, we document dot body append child. So we're adding the overlay with the text and the image, and we're putting it on top of our HTML. Here we've got the image and the caption being showed overlaid on the web page. You can see the web page behind it become semi-transparent. And we also have an X to use as a close button. So here we want to add a close button. And by doing that, we say here close box dot inner HTML. This right here is going to give us the image of the X. On click, remove the child. So when a user clicks on the X, it's going to remove the overlay off of the HTML. Then it's going to here append the child to the close box, and then we're going to append the overlay. So now my overlay now has 3 elements. We've got the image, we've got the text or the description, and we have the close button up here. Now, finally, if we're going to explore the browser object model, our window is a root node because it is going to contain everything else. So here we can see our hierarchy of the BOM, and our window is the main node. The history object is going to be the object that stores all of the history list information, and your history list are going to be all of the pages that you've opened during the current session. So you can see where this is kind of going. We have a location object that is going to store information about the current page, and we can use it to provide a URL if we're going to say new browser window. We have a navigator object, and that's going to have all of the information about the user's browser. Usually that's the debugging and things like that for the programmers. We do have a screen object that is going to store information about your user's screen, so size, resolution, etc. Now, in order to design a web app, we need to know our users, figure out how the app is going to be used, provide consistent feedback, and good feedback, anticipate users, and in the end, we need to keep it simple. A lot of information was covered today, but hopefully we've touched on all of these about understanding the principles of building a web app, creating nodes, appending them, restructuring your document by adding, deleting, copying, and moving nodes. We looked at how we can create time interval commands that we can repeat either in a time block or at set intervals. We looked at the different types of dialog boxes that we have and how sometimes that can be blocked by pop-ups, blockers. We also talked about the overlays, which all lie on top of that web document. And then finally, we just took a look at the structure and the objects within the browser object model. I hope to see you next time, and we will be chatting again real soon.